is ordered as previously announced. Further proceedings on the question will be postponed. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 9597, the Federal Acquisition Security Council Improvement Act of 2024. The clerk will please designate the bill.
H.R. 9597, the Federal Acquisition Security Council Improvement Act of 2024, a bill to amend Title 41 to make changes with respect to the Federal Acquisition Security Council and for other purposes.
Without objection, the bill shall be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. The chair recognizes himself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will please designate the amendment.
An amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 9597 is offered by Mr. Comer of Kentucky.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the substitute will be considered as original text for the purposes of further amendment. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for a statement on the bill and the amendment. Our foreign adversaries have been using information technology and telecommunications equipment to infiltrate and exploit the systems of the U.S. government's federal agencies. Congress has worked to address this threat by passing numerous bills to prohibit federal agencies from purchasing or using technology from sources of concern. This includes legislation to prohibit federal agencies from using telecommunications and video surveillance equipment provided by certain Chinese companies. Legislation to prohibit federal agencies from procuring electronic products or services that include semiconductors produced by certain Chinese companies. And legislation to prohibit federal agencies from buying or using drones manufactured or assembled by certain Chinese companies. In addition to these outright prohibitions, Congress also established the Federal Acquisition Security Council, or the FASC. The FASC has the authority to recommend that agencies exclude certain sources from federal procurement processes or remove certain technologies from federal information systems. However, Congress must have a more active role in directing the FASC to consider the exclusion or removal of certain sources of concern from federal systems. This bill, the FASC Improvement Act, authorizes FASC to issue binding removal and exclusion orders when directed by Congress. Such new binding removal and exclusion orders would complement the existing authorities of the FASC to issue recommendations. However, this new authority provides Congress a streamlined and standardized process for prohibiting federal agencies from buying or using a source of concern in the future. To carry out this responsibility, the FASC needs to have adequate support and be appropriately resourced. H.R. 9597 provides this support by strengthening the governing structure of the FASC by moving it into the Executive Office of the President and elevating the FASC agency membership requirements. This bill expands the FASC's focus to include acquisition security more broadly beyond its current narrower focus on supply chain risk, and requires the FASC to proactively monitor and evaluate certain sources for ongoing risk. This bill also relocates currently authorized appropriations to establish a FASC program office within the Office of National Cyber Director. This FASC program office is authorized to provide the FASC critical operational, legal, and policy support it needs to draft and issue removal and exclusion orders. Such support it currently lacks. Importantly, this bill incorporates best practices from the recent government-wide procurement prohibitions I mentioned earlier, including necessary due process considerations, national security exemptions, case-by-case waiver processes, and second-order prohibitions. In other words, the FASC Improvement Act consolidates the past 6 years of congressional legislation addressing national security procurement risks by reforming established processes and expanding authorities. We need to ensure the executive branch can promptly act to protect the federal supply chain and agency information systems from nefarious technology influenced by a foreign adversary. This bill will help prevent American taxpayer dollars from supporting companies owned or controlled by foreign enemies and hostile actors. This bipartisan bill provides the FASC with the teeth and resources it needs to protect the federal supply chain. I want to thank the ranking member and his staff for partnering on this legislation. I urge my colleagues to support this necessary and timely national security reform legislation. I now yield to Ranking Member Raskin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to have worked on the Federal Acquisition Security Improvement Act with you. This bill has benefited from extensive input from OMB and the National Cyber Director. The Federal Acquisition Security Council was established in 2018. The bill would strengthen it by moving it into the Executive Office of the President, increasing its membership requirements and requiring the President to name a chair. The bill would expand the Council's authorities beyond supply chain security to include acquisition security more broadly, and grants it the authority to issue removal or exclusion orders of specific companies when necessary or when directed to do so by Congress. Finally, the bill would create a streamlined process for Congress to designate sources of concern and requires the council to initiate an investigation into these congressionally designated sources with appropriate due process, government-wide input, and potential subcontractor prohibitions. I commend the staffs on both sides of the aisle, Mr. Chairman, for their hard work on this measure, and I yield back.
Chairman yields back. Do any other members seek recognition on the bill? Seeing none. The question is now on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The question is now in favorably reporting H.R. 9597 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri.
I request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote is ordered. As previously announced, further proceedings on the question will be postponed. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 9595.